Here's a quick lesson on how to turn anything into a percentage. So let's just say, for example, that we have a problem that is saying we are starting out with 4.0 grams of something. Let's just call it grams of flour. And by the end, we end up with, let's say we end up with only, let's just say 1 gram, 1.0 grams of flour. And the question is, how much flour is left as a percentage? So let's first just see if we can write an equality, because we know that if we can write an equality, we can come up with some really nice tools for solving our problems. So let me first go over what 100% even means. So this is important. You can think of 100% as just meaning all of it. All of it, the whole thing. Let's just say the maximum. It just means everything, the whole thing. So if we look at our problem here, what number here could we say would represent 100% of the flour? Well, we want the bigger number, right? What we started with. We're going to say that we started with 100% of the flour, and we want to know how much flour is left, what percent of the flour is left. So the equality that we can write is that in this problem, so here's our equality. Equality. In this problem, 4.0 grams of flour is equal to 100%. Because we're saying that that's what we're starting with. We started with 100% and we want to see what we're left with. And so now we're ready to solve our problem using dimensional analysis. Oh no, wait, we're not ready. What do we need to do with our equality? We need to write our conversion factors. So the tools now that we can make are, let's see, by now you should be really familiar with how to do this. So let's write two conversion factors with this equality. 4.0 grams of flour divided by 100% is equal to 1. And that is equal to 100% divided by 4.0 grams of flour. Okay, now we're ready to solve our problem. So let me just make a workspace. Oh, sorry, that line was so crooked, I can't even allow it to continue to be. Okay, so now let's solve our problem. So our first step is we're going to write what we actually know. So we're trying to find out how much is left. We know that we have it in grams here. So let's start with 1.0 grams of flour. Now, if your first thought is not, oh great, I'm going to turn this into a fraction. It should be. I'm going to write this here in bright blue with a star next to it. If you haven't already written this in your notes somewhere, go ahead and write it now. The first thing you should do when solving dimensional analysis problems, or maybe a better way to say that would be when solving problems using dimensional analysis. Let me change that. When solving problems using dimensional analysis, is, I'm going to write some dots here for suspense. Change everything into what? Into a fraction. And that is so easy to do. There's no reason why we shouldn't do it. Let's do it now. And the way we can turn anything at all, an octopus, a hippopotamus, an Adriana, into a fraction is by dividing by 1. So I haven't changed anything here. I still have 1 gram of flour. I've just written it in fraction form by dividing by 1. And now we can choose a conversion factor that will help us get to our goal. The question is asking for how much is left. How much is left? Let me just do this as a percentage. So we're looking for percentage. Right now, what we have is grams, right? Mass of flour. So we don't want the answer in that form. What we want is a percentage. So let's multiply this by a conversion factor that will help us get rid of grams of flour. And there's only one option that will work for us. It's this one right here that has grams of flour in the denominator. And that's what we want to cancel out, right? So we have grams of flour in the top here. We need grams of flour in the bottom in order to cancel it out. So let's do that now. So we have 100% divided by 4.0 grams of flour. And let's go ahead and cancel out whatever we can. So we can cancel out grams of flour on the top and bottom. And that's all we can cancel out. But look, we don't even want to cancel anything else out. Look what we ended up with. A percentage as our units, right? And so, and really percentages, I guess, is not really technically a unit. It's just a way of expressing a number. But in this case, we're just noticing like, oh, we're going to get an answer in a percentage, and that's what we want. So let's go ahead and do the math here. If we multiply across the top, this is how you multiply fractions. You just multiply across the top and then multiply across the bottom. So let's do the top first. We end up with 1 times 100%. I don't even have to write that out. We can just say in our heads, oh, anything times 1 is itself. So we're just going to end up with 100% at the top. 100% divided by, and then 1 times 4.0. So again, I don't have to write those two things out. I can just say, oh, great. Well, that's easy. The answer is 4.0. And then you could do this in your head if you wanted to, or if you're like me and you want to ask your calculator, that's also perfectly fine. So we need to ask our calculator, what is 100 divided by 4? And if you want to put 4.0, that's fine too. Either way, you would get the answer of 25. So let's come back over here and write that in. So the numbers divided would give us 25, and we're left with percent. And there is our answer. So the answer to this problem is when we have only 1 gram of flour left, we have 25%. The cool thing is we can use this conversion factor, these conversion factors, to help us figure out other things too. So just for fun, let's do another question using these conversion factors. So now let's do this. We start off with 4 grams of flour. And how about we do it the other way this time? So this time, let's say how many grams of flour do we have? And let's say when we have, let's just put 10% left. So what is the question asking for? It's asking for how many grams of flour, right? And so let me just get rid of this problem here because we're finished with that. We're working on something new now. And so the first thing we'll need to do now is we're still using the same equality, right? We still have the same starting amount of flour. So our equality of 4.0 grams of flour equals 100%. That's still good. Let's leave that how it is. What we know now is that we have 10% left. So again, I'm just going to start my problem by writing down what I have, 10%. And don't you dare move on until you do the very first thing that you should always do when you're solving problems using dimensional analysis. Boom, change everything to a fraction. So let's do that quickly. We don't have to even think about it now. We just divide by 1. And now we don't want percentage because the problem is asking for grams. We need to multiply by a conversion factor that lets us cancel percentage. So we'll need to use this one right here. So let's do 4.0 grams of flour divided by 100%. And let's just cancel out whatever we can. So here we can cancel out our percent, cancel out a percent. And this should be really nice because look, it's asking for how many grams, and what do we have here? Grams. That's all that's left. Let's go ahead and multiply across the top and the bottom. So 10 times 4.0 grams of flour is going to be 40. 40.0 grams of flour. Now, if you're thinking like, wait a second, that can't be right. We can't have more flour. Hold on a second. We're not done because we have something in the bottom too. In the bottom, we have 1 times 100, which is 100. And so now let's ask our calculator, what is 40 divided by 100? Let's see what the calculator says. So 40 divided by 100 gives us 2/5. Now let's just say we want that in decimal form. I'm just going to click this green button here and say, give it to me in a decimal. And it tells me that we have 0.4 grams. So that should equal 0.4 grams of flour. And that should be our answer right there. 0.4 grams of flour. Thank you, Conversion Factors. You make our lives so much easier. In case you want to check if this makes sense, one thing you can do is just sort of think about this and say, okay, what does 10% really mean? And when I think of 10%, to me, I'm like, okay, there should be 10% in 100%. So one way that I can check if this makes sense is to say like, okay, let's take this number and multiply it by 10. That should give me what I started with. That should give me back my 100%. So this is just an extra step that I like to take because I like to think through things and say like, does that really make sense? So let me take my 0.4 and say, all right, if I multiply you by 10, what does that give me? And look, it gives us 4, and that's what we started with. So I feel really good about this answer because I'm like, yeah, I even thought through it and it still makes sense. So I feel comfortable just leaving this answer as is. See you in the next video.